I can start by saying I always paint at least 3 layers. So I'll start off with my layout and do a rough layout. This is starting to go into its 3rd coat. I paint in thin layers. If I had my way, I would use as many colors as I possibly can. You can get them very muddy very fast if you do that. So I try to limit my colors. I mix my flesh tones with red, yellow, and blue. And I use 2 reds and 2 blues, very deep yellow for the most colors. And I lay them out on my palette, and I do mix them to a certain extent, but then I do a lot of blending on the canvas. I tend to work with at least 3 brushes per area. If I want to move into a darker area, I'm going to change brushes so that I don't get a really muddied area. But the color, for the most part, is the same color scheme. So I'm using a combination of cobalt blue and cadmium red and cadmium yellow. And the method I'm using is pretty much a traditional method of painting that's been around. Well, for centuries probably, but definitely since the 1800s, where you tone the canvas with a neutral color and then you work on top of that color so that everything lighter than your neutral, this would be my underpainting here, everything lighter than your neutral pops out and everything else sits back. When I was in high school, I'd always wanted to be a painter. Well, I take it back. I always wanted to be an artist. I didn't really know if I wanted to be a painter or sculptor or an illustrator. So I wanted to go to art school, but I was quite the hellion in high school. And so I cut my SATs and never took my SAT exams. I didn't want my father to know that. So I applied to Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts because they were an art school and you didn't have to have your SATs to get in. And unknowingly ended up in one of the best figurative art schools in the country. And so Thomas Eakins and John Singer Sargent and William Merritt Chase and Mary Cassatt all went to school there. And so their influence was really heavy at the academy, and so I was able to learn a lot just about how this method, and we learned even traditional things like we learned egg tempera, and we did nothing but the figure for hours on end. Back as an undergraduate, I had a teacher who really pushed my buttons, I guess is the way I would say it, make me move outside of my comfort zone. And up to that point, I had come out of the academy, and in the academy, you basically were not allowed to work from photographs. The tradition was all direct observation. And so I had just given myself permission to work from photographs. And I was a portrait painter, and I really enjoyed painting portraits. And I got there, and this teacher said, well, Carol, for this semester, I want you to paint anything you want, except you cannot do portraits, and you cannot work from photographs. And I said, well, what am I supposed to do? And he said, Carol, there's a whole world of ideas out there you can be doing, and I think you just need to find them. I started painting my nightmares because I had horrible nightmares about this. And in my nightmares, I would be in these beautiful Grand Hotel interiors, and there would be these tornadoes coming at me and these huge, beautiful hotel rooms that were filled with glass and chandeliers and mirrors and all this, beautiful glassware. And every time I'd look up, there'd be a tornado, and I would run and I would run and I would run, and no matter where I ran, there was just more glass and more rooms. So I started painting my dreams. So I started to investigate hotels and why would I do a hotel, and the history of hotels and the history of still life painting, because theoretically a hotel room is a still life. And so still life kind of took off in Holland. And because you still didn't have a lot of literacy, you had what would I call it, a didactic type of painting where they played with allegory of the senses or the allegories of the virtues and vices. I also discovered that the box, or the vessel, is a feminine image, goes back to the history of Pandora. And as I was painting these beer mugs, I discovered a couple of things I really liked about them. First, that they were a feminine image, and second, that I love the color flowing through. I love that amber color and sunlight flowing through it. But it also was a dichotomy of good and bad. I love beer, it makes me fat. Alcoholism can run in the family. You can't just drink it all day long. There are certain pros and cons. And so I started using the beer mug is a personal motif of myself. And slowly but surely I started thinking, well, if I was in a room, what table would I sit at? If you look at that interior, one of those tables will have a beer mug on it, because that's the table I sit at. Later on I went off to school and I stopped doing the figure simply because, well, I went into watercolor and I was competing nationally with my watercolors, and I was doing other things in the figure. And then just recently I decided that I really wanted to go back into just the straight figure painting. I started working with my students and just taking photographs of them, then creating different backgrounds that would kind of imply something about their personality. So this painting is of my student Murphy. Murphy's from China, and absolutely brilliant when it comes to art history. I got work from photographs, and I took these photographs. I took just about 3 of them, and liked the photograph I got and decided that's what I would work from. I take that and I find an appropriate background that I think would work. And for Murphy, her love of art history inspired me to paint a view from the Museum of Modern Art, second floor, out the window. And I do, when I get to go to museums, I do like to, especially if I get up to New York and get to the MoMA and to the Met, I just love to be able to go in there and photograph details of how artists have handled certain areas. And I just find it fascinating. And I'll just, shoot rolls of films of hands, trying to figure out how the hands work. I will go back and forth on my edges, so sometimes I really don't care what my edge looks like. around the black because I'm gonna have to come in and paint all of this. This is just my second coat there, so. I do look at, say, how John Singer Sargent might have come in and just deftly thrown a brush stroke on to create the sense of a fold, or how Vermeer would use just a little strike of light to capture the light on an earring or something. Balancing the color between warms and cools and getting it where it clicks kind of nicely is a favorite process. Another thing I like to do is to work with transparent glazes. So working with thicks and thins to pull one color over another color so that you get this. In other words, the color I'm putting on right now is the same color. I'm not mixing it at all. But when it lays over a dark color, it has a totally different effect than when it lays over a light color. And so a lot of that is just strictly underpainting. I was painting over in Carlo Vivari, and I had these little kids come up with me, and they pointed to what I was doing, and they looked at what I was doing, and I did my Nemluvy and Chesky, I don't speak Czech, and they all smiled and kept talking, and then they patted me on the shoulder and they disappeared. And I thought, okay. And about 10 minutes later, they showed back up with paper. And they sat down and proceeded to pick up my paintbrushes and start painting with me, using my paints and my brushes. And I couldn't tell them no because they didn't get the language.